The National Speech and Debate Association.
Anything good there?
Is that in the top?
Yeah. Fair.
Proud product.
Seems like the beginning of the season was like 100.
Is that what it says?
Yeah. A project of
Whoever went in, you got to receive it. They got to finish shit. They got to finish it. Whoever went in, they got to receive it.
Well, that's not gonna happen. But that's wishful thinking.
I wouldn't be that
No, it's not.
Right.
Oh, well, you would.
The license.
I say so. I wouldn't do it at all.
All right.
She said it's in Long Beach.
Hey,
no,
y'all.
exactly.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you doing? Doing very well on this lovely sunny day. Welcome to Saturday.
Sunny day. See, you go to church this morning.
Sunny day.
Welcome to the Tabroom teach-in, and special thanks to the Association, I'll get this right, the Association of Black Argumentation Professionals for putting this together. We're really happy to host this at Wake University. I myself do not know how to tab and have always wanted to learn, so I'm really excited to be here and see what everybody has to say. I'm going to introduce our panelists. I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Amber Kelsey. I coach at Wake Forest University. This is Samantha Godby at West Virginia University, Catherine Rubino, United States Military Academy, Willie Johnson at Rutgers University, and Nick Ryan at Liberty University. So these are our panelists today. Let's give them a round of applause. So these are the experts. They're going to tell us some things about tabbing, give us a little brief introduction. Apparently it's a very complicated process, so we probably won't get into all of the nuts and bolts, but they'll kind of step us through some of the basics, and then they'll say some words of advice that they've kind of picked up in their experiences, and then we'll just open it up to the floor. We have some pre-fielded questions, and then if you have questions, and we'll just, kind of take their words of wisdom. Sound good? Sounds good. All right. Well, I'm gonna give it up to Nick. All right.
So the first thing we were asked to kind of talk about was how to set up a tournament on Tabroom. The tabbing process is how the actual administration of the tournament happens, how it's determined who you debate against, and how a judge is put into that place into that debate round. But the first thing you have to do when you get to tabroom.com, if you're hosting a tournament, is set up a tournament. So Nick is going to walk us through and actually set up novice JV nationals at West Virginia, since we're going to be tabbing that. So we're going to set it up a real tournament to kind of give everyone a sense of how it's done, and if there are any questions as that comes up, feel free to try to make this as informal, interactive as possible, so everyone really understands what's going on.
And if you all have your laptops, you could actually do this on your own computer, because you could set up a test tournament for yourselves that isn't live for anybody else, but you can follow the steps if you wanted to, and that way you could ask questions. Hopefully, this is kind of a little bit blurry, but we'll try to make it work. On Tabroom, on your main account page, there should be a button that says Request a New Tournament. And that's kind of the foundation for starting every tournament. Usually 90% of the problems that occur on Tabroom, in my experience, when something goes wrong, it's because I set something up improperly. And so I have to go back and change the settings as part of the process. So once you hit the set up a tournament, you'll be greeted with a page that looks like this about managing the tournament. The important parts for this is if you have done a tournament or will continue to do a tournament in years future, you don't want to put a date in for the tournament, because it will archive all previous year's results of the tournament absent a date. If you put in a date, it'll separate that tournament from everything else. So it's also important to keep the name the same on a yearly basis. So I copied the Novice Nationals at West Virginia University as the previous name, and I put that in the tournament name field. Their tournament starts in March of 2019, so I did this the wrong way. You got to click forward in order to go to 2019 dates. And it is the 2nd through the 4th. So you just click the dates in the little box. The web name is an existing one, so I want to use the existing one. Otherwise, you can create a new one. It's WVU JV Novice. And that way, the URL stays the same every time. So it's http www.jvnows@tabroom.com is that individual tournament's website name. Although you click on it on Tabroom, it'll show you a different URL, but that's kind of the shortcut version of it. And then it's in Morgantown. Time zone is Eastern. I can clone a tournament from all the previous tournaments, and it would just clone all of my setups from any of the previous tournaments I've hosted. Or I can choose create a tournament from scratch. And then for those of you that are wanting to do it on your own, you hit that hidden test tournament, and that way you can kind of play around with features without it showing live to everybody else. So since this is a real tournament, I'll keep it live.
No, I would definitely suggest if you are just trying to learn Tabroom and to do the hidden tournament thing, because it allows you to work with all the mechanics and everything, to learn about like kind of more the internal things like setting up prefs and mutual preferences and stuff like that. So that's always a good thing if you are attempting to run a tournament or to tab a tournament, to do test runs.
So after that, I'll click the next, and then you set the deadlines for when registration is due, and usually, Sam, you usually make it due the week before, right?
Like the Wednesday before.
Yeah. For some reason, it does not give me that option of what the calendar is. Do you know the date off the top of your head?
No, but I will look it up. 3
Well, because it's on the 2nd, so it'd be at the end of February, wouldn't it?
It is February 27th.
And then you said the time works here, date does not work for some reason. Oh, registration opens. It should open. Now.
Well, you're doing it in front of 1 people, so.
Yeah, I mean.
Tabroom's gonna mess up something up for you.
Alright. So I chose when the registration opens. I selected the day so that way anybody could put registrations in anytime between now and when entries are due. That way you can kind of gauge what your numbers will look like. And then you want to have a registration deadline so that you can lock in catering and things like that. It's generally a couple days beforehand or whenever your catering deadline is. That same deadline is when judge fees are generally frozen and when judges are needed to be registered. So all those dates generally stay the same amongst all of them. And it's changes based on when you put the first one in. But you can set up different deadlines for different drop deadlines or change deadlines. After the registration deadline, usually people will have to email you, which is probably better for dealing with drops than letting them do it on their own, just experience from being a tournament director. Then you select the tournament circuits, and for college ones, it's generally NET CETA. If you're doing a high school one, you have to identify which circuit you're selecting, and you'll go from there. And then you choose the tournament location. US, Morgantown, Virginia. I think it's West Virginia. Oh yeah, what? Oh, it defaults to where you're actually set, where your account is versus where it's set up, if that makes sense. And then I'll set up a new list anyway. And then you create your tournament. Oh, I don't. So you create a new host site if you're not using a different one. This helps auto-import rooms. So if you have the same room list from year to year, that's what the purpose of the host site is. But for the purposes of showing everybody, I'll just create another host site. All right, then it's confirmed my request. In order to get back to it, I'll have to click on my username. And then on the right-hand side, the tournaments that you're tabbing show up in blue versus the tournaments that you're entered at or are waiting to enter in. So after you click on that, you'll get to this main page, and then you have to set up all of the other logistics of the tournament. So the first thing I normally set up is the judge pool, which is under settings and judges. And then for college tournaments, we normally just have the single judge pool because we only have one event. If you're hosting a high school tournament that has like public forum, Lincoln Douglas, or policy or whatever other debate events you have, you'll want to set up different judge pools for each of those events. Otherwise, for policy tournaments and for college tournaments, I just create a judge pool named all, and then the 4-letter abbreviation is just all. And then you can set up restrictions, so people that are JV novice only versus the open division, you can set that up in the individual event registration. And then you can ask for, you want to suppress judge codes, which means that it will just show judges' names. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just hypothetically, if you accidentally didn't hit that clone thing, how do you delete a tournament?
So the deleting a tournament is actually rather difficult in my experience. You have to email Palmer, and Palmer will delete it on your behalf. or the way that we did this, because I created a tournament, and then Michael Hall also created the same tournament, and our solution was to make the tournament hidden, and then we changed his date far in the future so nobody can register for it. So you can make the tournament hidden again in the future. So I always do the suppress codes because the only tournament that really makes codes for judges is the NSCA national tournament. Everybody else prefers being able to identify who the teams are and who the judges are. And then you usually have a list of judges that are registered for the tournament. So I publish the list of judges online. You require judges to have linked accounts, which means that they're all linked to their Tabroom account. And that's important for online balloting because if judges aren't linked on Tabroom, they don't get online ballots. And Tabroom, for some reason, removed the feature of me being able to link your email for you at different points in time, so it's just better to require that at the very beginning. Sometimes you'll want to require judge phone numbers at registration, and this is useful for if somebody's late to their round or hasn't turned in their ballot on time, you need to get a hold of them for whatever reason, to just have their phone numbers in Tabroom. So you may want to select that. It's not required or anything like that, but that's somewhat useful.
It also is extremely helpful if you're sending parents through text.
Yes. This other information, there's a lot of other ones that are generally more useful for high school. If you wanted to have a different pref system for first year out judges, you could mark first year out judges and then you can create a label for them, and then you can create all first year outs as free strikes if you really wanted to in the judge preferences. But for the purpose of most tournaments, selecting these ones is kind of preferred. And then the burden method, you pick one, it's entries owed per judge or per judge owed, or rounds owed per entry. And most tournaments will choose rounds owed per entry. So like at Wake, you are required 4 rounds per entry since it's an 8-round tournament, or 3 rounds. And since West Virginia is a 7-round tournament, I think you require 4, right? And then you can, after you do that, you can create custom round obligations. So if there are 2 entries, 7 rounds, that way a single judge can fulfill the obligation for 2 teams versus having to hire out that extra debate, is generally how Sam does her tournament. So after you set that up, there's a couple of other screens that you can do. The hires screen, the offered tournament hire judging allows somebody to buy rounds from the tournament itself. So if the tournament wanted to sell those rounds. The enable hiring exchange allows individuals to put themselves on the hiring exchange and then be approved and then can sell those rounds. And then the rest of that all deals with if you were buying rounds from the tournament directly. So I've enabled the hiring exchange, I've hit save hiring judges. Tabbing, you can get lots of different high school tournaments have a lot of different rules, more so than some of the college ones. So you can prevent back-to-back rounds for judges if you wanted to. Judges can judge the same event twice since there's only one event. That tends to be the case. You don't let judge pools override categories is a one of the high school preference systems that we don't really do. The allow panels with same school judges has bit me on more than one occasion. Tabroom generally defaults to not putting 2 individuals from the same school on an elim panel unless you have this button checked. So your Ben Hagwood and myself wouldn't be allowed to be on the same panel if the button wasn't checked. And generally, your panels will be a lot better if you allow judges from the same school to judge a debate. And at regional tournaments, it's kind of a necessity.
Like, you can't have semifinals with 3 schools left if you don't do that. Like that.
Especially when it's Liberty and June.
Yeah, yeah, you just can't do it.
Yes, Carlos.
You just zoom in, so.
Yep.
Ah.
Does that help? Sorry.
Way helps.
Definitely. Good call. There's the randomized judge assignments, which is kind of a don't use prefs button, and it will just auto place judges wherever it wants. You can use diversity tracking and which allows individuals to opt in for diversity reasons, and the tournament can set up whatever those are. And then you also have the option of displaying on when people go to enter prefs, people who have opted in. And generally, tournaments that do opt in won't display that on prefs. So generally, those are both. Diversity is checked, and then the other one is not. And then the ballot entry, there's a drop-down box that you can force judges to enter their ballot twice, which is kind of the norm. Or you can visually scan the confirmation, which just shows the judge the ballot they previously entered and they hit confirm. Or they just enter it the first time and then it's good. So most people have the enter it twice. The different ballot formats all are for the different kind of high school events versus things that most of you will have to deal with.
Now, on that tab is where I have the MPJ placement links, but yours does.
I think mine might be in, I haven't set up the events.
Yeah.
That's
That's probably the reason. Ratings, you could set a different deadline for judge registration than what you have for team registration. You could set a different deadline for when preferences open, generally the week of the tournament. So during the probably right after the deadline. And then they're due before the tournament starts. You don't want people changing their prefs after the tournament has started. That will create complications for what your pref results are at different points in time. So you save those, and then there are different settings you can choose. You have to meet your judge obligations before you can enter your preferences is one of those options, because there are lots of teams that will wait to enter all of their judges or not have enough judging and want to do prefs, but you can't then force them to get judging. So that might be one thing for, depending on the schools that enter your tournament. Asking for judge paradigms during registration is generally useful. Most college coaches at this point in time have paradigms, so that's one that's easy. Judges may identify as diversity enhancing. Free strikes don't meet judge obligations. This is generally the NDT checkbox for people that haven't met the minimum round requirement. We'll check that one because they're all free strikes, and then they don't count towards your entry obligation. This is where you make that first year outs or free strikes button, and then you don't have to prep free strikes. Now, yeah, the conflicts, generally you want to enter them separately rather than on the prep sheet because it penalizes large schools that have a large number of judges. If you force them on the prep sheet, it forces a bunch of people up. So you want to enter conflicts separately. And then the Pref Method, there are a variety of different options. There's the MPJ tiers by whole judge or by round, and then there's ordinals, and then there's a community rating. And so MPJ tiers is a category system. This is back when we did the 6 categories, 5 categories, whatever category system it was.
Some high school tournaments still use it.
Yeah, some high school tournaments still use it, where you have to put a certain percentage of judges in each individual category. So you have to have like 20% of judges in category 1, 25% in category 2, whatever category, whatever percent you do. This, by whole judge, is the number of bodies there are, versus by number of rounds. So the 20% would be number of rounds that those judges are available for versus the number of bodies that are in there. That way, usually you want it by rounds because judges that are in for 1 round or 2 rounds, you don't want them being placed all in tier 1 and then people never getting a tier 1 judge because they've been burned by a low round count. For most college tournaments, it's ordinals. And then none of the other things are generally useful.
I would talk about strikes a little bit.
All right, you want to talk about it?
Oh yeah, so in terms of strikes, is that it sets up a model where schools can do total strikes completely, so school-wide strikes. It allows to set a particular cap on strikes. So maybe effective in a situation where a team may just strike judges for no reason at all. It puts a cap on how many judges can be striked. It also allows for them to determine, for a tournament to determine, given like a smaller judging pool, to stop for certain judges being scratched completely without any justification.
All right, that generally sets up the judges. Then you have to go set up the events. So settings, events, add a new event, and this is junior varsity. You're going to choose the judge category, so all is the only category I created. The short abbreviation would just be JV. You could choose the per entry fee. Sam's tournament is a free tournament, free advertising. You need to choose the number of competitors per entry, so it's a team policy, it's 2. The maximum number of competitors is 2. The entry codes, you can choose numeric is what the NSDA uses, where it just assigns teams random numbers. The school code, which is the short version of the school name, and then it can assign a random code to it. Oh, zoom in, sorry. Thank you, good call. There is school code and entry initials, school code and entry name, which is whatever names they create for that individual team, school name and entry initials. So generally the school name and entry initials is the best one, because a lot of times those codes will be too long and they'll be cut off on Tabroom if you go anything too much longer than that, and then you'll have real problems with teams identifying who it is. Then you choose the type of event, so policy, the event level, JV, and save. And then those setup options are useful for Tabroom at the end when it calculates the points for CETA, ADA, etc. It needs to know the entry level division for all of those things. All right, so set that part of it up. Registration, you can set different deadlines for each individual division. You can set a field cap, so if you only have a certain number of rooms, this would be useful to type in how many teams your tournament can take as a total. You can waitlist entries over that number, so if you get more rooms, you can let them in. The best one to take is take TBAs without caps. So with a cap, people will put in TBAs. If you take TBA entries without a cap, then you can just take school entries to give you a general idea for catering, room numbers, etc. Before your tournament. If you have qualifications for your tournament, for most high school tournaments, the required number of TOC bids, you allow people to enter those to then be able to get into the tournament. Publish a web field report. You want to include the wait list so that people know who's waitlisted. Allow hybrid entries. It's not a supplemental event, which is useful for like Kentucky's first year breakout is a supplemental event that then allows you to do elim separately. You could change judge obligations or the number of rounds that are owed for that division, and then judges can strike themselves from that event. So if you're like judges, you don't want judges judging in open, or you want judges that are able to be JV Novice only, you would check that button for open or whatever other division you want. Same thing with the breakout flag, which is the first year elim. You could do that there. The next option is pairing. And this is where you can set up a lot of different options. So the round robin format for a smaller tournament, the flip for sides in every round, which is the PF model of every debate is a flip. You can allow entries to debate their own school. Hybrids can debate their hybrid partner school. Preset seating, You can change what seed categories people will hit in the preset debates. So if you wanted to rank teams before this tournament and then make them debate a team in each of those categories, so if you did 4 presets and had an 8-round tournament, this is where you could start setting that process up. Otherwise, most tournaments will do it randomly. The power matching method is now Gary's SOP, seed and op seed. And if you ask me to explain the details of Gary's matchmaking pull-up system, that'll be a struggle. All I know is it deals with the strength of your opponent in terms of their win-loss record and their speaker points, plus your opponent's record and speaker points, and it creates the seeds in that world. And Gary has a detailed explanation of that somewhere on the seeded forums. You could power match by the first tiebreak, not win-loss, which would ignore brackets. It would allow teams, so if you had a very well-speaking team that didn't win debates, they could suddenly be in the top bracket. Mostly you want to protect the win-loss bracket, so the 4-win bracket, the 3-win bracket, the 2-win bracket. Assigning rooms by brackets would increase the number of room moves per individual debate, so most people don't change that. The pull-up method is either Gary's SOP, worst opponent seed, whoever's had the easiest draw, or pull up from the middle, which is an old method of doing it in TRPC. I don't know, still done in some tournaments. And then in Gary's system, you want to allow repeat pull-ups. If the team with the worst that had the easiest schedule ends up winning their debate, they could then be pulled up again because they still may or may not have had the easiest draw. And then you can minimize pull-ups, and then Tabroom will go haywire and will make teams be AF multiple times, like 4 times or neg 4 times in a 6-round tournament. That's not something that you generally want. And entries shouldn't debate multiple pull-ups. You can use the same rooms round to round, which minimizes room moves. Judges can judge their own school, block first year out, allow repeat judging on the other side. And the important one is allow repeat judging in elims. At lots of regional tournaments, if you don't allow somebody to judge somebody again in elims, the preferences on those panels will start to get rough, especially in later elims, because if somebody judges you in octos, the Tabroom without that check will consider you ineligible to judge them in quarters, semis, and finals, and then you start to run into lots of trouble with getting clean judges.
Yeah, so basically it'll remove them from the judge pool, so they won't be able to judge next round. So if you don't check this button, you'll be like, where did all the judges go?
The entries can't advance after loss number. Generally, in a 6-round tournament, it'll be 4 losses. Means that they won't be able to go to elims. At an 8-round tournament or a national tournament, 4 losses will also mean that they won't be able to go to elims. And that helps Tabroom set up its preference system. So the maximum prep for init debates. Gary's system, he uses a 50-30, which means that you can get in the top 50th percentile of judges within a mutuality of 30%. So if I rank somebody as my ordinal number 1 and Sam ranks somebody as her ordinal 29, that judge could be placed in that debate. So the mutuality determines the difference between Sam and I's ranking as long as they were within the top 50th percentile of our prefs.
And after this, we have some visuals of what that looks like.
And then, so you can also make the maximum prep for teams that already can't advance or are eliminated higher. Generally, a lot of tournaments will expand that to 60, 70, or even beyond in order to maximize preferences for the debates that are break rounds or above the break round. Yeah.
So how does that work for when you get a mutual low in a round?
It depends on what the tournament settings were for that. So that's the preference of, we could talk about that in one of the questions that I saw was a pre-scripted question about preferences. And so it's a question of mutual preferred judging is taken one of 2 ways. The preferred part or the mutual part. So there's either we should constrain the differences in where we rank people. So if we could go there are some people, I'm probably more on this side, that say we should value mutuality over preference in order to get more people in debates, which means that in some tournaments, you could get somebody in your 70th percentile, but if we both agree that they're a 70, that seems like a better fit than me getting my 1 and Sam getting her 30, which would be both a highly preferred judge, but less mutual.
This will happen a lot in a tournament with multiple divisions.
Yeah.
Because it's harder to place judges given that like novice is the last thing you're pairing. Right? So mutuality is a better way to place judges versus like just being like well, they're in the top 50 percentile, yet this person 1 and this person 47.
It's also true that in a tournament that allows judges to be novice or JV only, that problem gets exacerbated because a lot of times the way schools will tend to do their pref sheets for their squad, especially for their novice teams, they'll copy their varsity prefs, and anybody who they maybe don't know or younger debaters are still debating wind up at the very bottom of their pref sheets. And so if you had those limits in a novice division in a regional tournament, there would be no judges left. So you have to kind of say, okay, we're definitely going down to 70, but it's going to be a 67, 71, and that's going to be, and you know, sometimes those are younger judges and you're giving them an opportunity to learn how to judge. You only learn how to judge by doing it. So you know, you're putting people, as many people as possible, into the best position possible to develop the talent pool.
How do tab rooms traditionally determine that strike point? Is it just based on how many judges there are, or like how do you know 50 versus 70%?
I think that a lot of it came from the Council of Tournament Directors documentation from like 2013, which said that you shouldn't go below 80% as like your hard line for strikes. I've certainly attended tournaments that have gone below that. I don't think this year we've done any that have let anybody get below an 80 as a hard line in my mind as a strike. But a lot of times, you know, I will tab tournaments, but I am only the tournament director for the West Point tournament. So I make the rules for the West Point tournament, but when I'm helping somebody out at their tournament, I kind of say, what do you want to do? And I can just make it work, whatever you tell me to do.
Yeah.
But it's kind of it's a decision that I think that tournament directors have to make.
And tournament directors should probably announce that, like while teams are filling out their
Sure.
strikes.
Where
So,
the
like,
strike line is.
yeah, so most national tournaments, it's kind of assumed that it's a 50-30, so top half somewhere within 30% mutuality. Most regional tournaments at this point in time, or at least tournaments that the Northeast and D7 tend to go to, are the 80-20, which is somewhere in your top 80% but within a 20% mutuality.
What ratio does like tab room start to, or the tournament becomes like dysfunctional almost, right? So like if we did say a 30-15, right? Like is there some metric to understand that like, you know, the tournament can't function if something is too preferred or whatever?
It depends on your judge pool size.
Yes.
Is the key.
That's the thing I was saying about earlier. If like you have a smaller pool, mutuality is way more necessary.
So like regional tournaments, generally, there's a small number of teams, large number of teams from the same schools that have the same prefs over and over again, which means that it's harder to fit everybody, give everybody their top 30. So when Liberty goes to a tournament, we take 10 teams. Mason goes to a tournament, they also take 10 teams. And then you have a couple of other teams, maybe another 10 teams total from other schools. It's very difficult to give all of those teams their top 30.
Especially when they bring a majority of the judging pool as well.
Right.
You can't get too hard and fast with it because it's kind of by standards of deviation, and the problem is when you have 20 teams from 2 schools, it'll jack that all up. But those are all good rules of thumb.
Yeah, and national tournaments, it's much easier to keep everything in the top half because there are so many judges
And extra rounds.
Diversity.
and extra
Well,
rounds.
some national tournaments.
True.
So like Gonzaga, where there's only 75 judges in the pool, it's not as easy
Sure,
in that world.
right.
Because people are gonna mutually prep, in the same situation that you just said, people are gonna mutually prep to say like 40 judges over and over and over again, even if they're not on the same team.
And that's all goes back to,
So-
it's hard to come up with these hard and fast rules, but they're just general principles that you kind of try to stay by. You know, if a tournament's harder to get to, you're going to get fewer judges. Hope, you know, if they're tournament in New York City, you might have more bodies available just because more people live there. And so you kind of try to create your balance based on those things.
Are there other questions about that part? Okay. As far as setting up, the other parts of this is this anonymized unpublished pairings, which means that when you go to pair rounds of the Tabroom in, it will it'll make the names of the teams disappear, which is somewhat good if you are the only person tabbing to kind of eliminate bias. Although if you have a tab room of 3 people, which is kind of the standard now from different schools, it makes it very difficult to figure out why judges aren't fitting in debates. It's much easier to identify who the school is, to be like, oh yeah, that judge from that school obviously won't fit in that debate because they're from that school. So I generally don't check that. The live updates, where you get the text and email blasts, the anonymized public pairings, where they only get the codes, is the NSDA tournament. The auto-published results, so whenever you pair, if I paired round 3, then round 2's results would be paired. I don't check this because oftentimes at smaller regional tournaments, I will run a test round 6 pairing just to make sure that round 6 was good. And then if it is a pairing that's doable, I'll go back and pair 5 rather than delete my round 6 pairing. And I don't want them to publish round 5 before I've actually set the judge pool. So I generally don't do that at smaller tournaments. And then the publish on judge confirmation is the new fancy button that Palmer added, which at the end of your debate, you can click, I've announced this decision, and then the results will be published on Tabroom within whatever the delay is, within the next minute or so. And then all those updates kind of occur. So win-loss only or full results. And the full results show speaker points, ranks, whatever tiebreaker metric you used. The tabulation screen, yeah. Oh, Zoom, yeah, somebody's got to remind me of this. The point increments, there's the options for whole points, half points, 25ths, or tenths. Most college tournaments are tenths now. You give team points is some PF tournaments still. The forbid low point wins is an option. You can allow tie points. You set the maximum or the minimum speaker points, and the default is always you have to give at least a 1. Otherwise, Tabroom won't let you do it. If they're really bad, then yeah, Tabroom won't let you go lower than that for some reason. And then the maximum. And then online ballots, and then it does the same thing. You could also set a minimum word count for RFDs, which is kind of nice. So if you have like a novice division and you want to get feedback for those novices, you could require judges to put in like 20 words on their ballot, and that way you don't just get a bunch of blank ballots with points that doesn't tell you how your debaters did. You can set up the new fancy widget Palmer added, which is the timer that occurs when you see your ballot on Tabroom now. So you can set the default online timer as 9 minutes, the prep time 10 minutes. If you have a flighted tournament for LD, you can set the difference between flight B and flight A start. The decisions are due at this tournament at 2 hours and 30 minutes, so that is 150 minutes. And elim decisions are due 165 minutes. And that way there'll be a countdown timer on people's ballots if you really wanted to kind of like move people along in deciding rounds. Sometimes that kind of makes people think about their decisions a little bit faster. The speaker awards requires me to set up the speaker tiebreak, which I haven't done yet, so there's not an option there yet. You could do by averages, not totals. The multi-judge panels points are by panels. So if you had 3-judge or 2-judge prelims, the panel would give points rather than an individual judge. The Mavericks, you can choose what they get. They get their points doubled, max ranks, the points doubled and rank +1, tournament average, or 0 points at the max rank. And then you can recognize, if you had to combine a novice and a JV division, because one of the divisions was too small, you can flag and recognize top novices, either overall or not advancing, in your award ceremony. If you wanted to set it up so the tournament announced the elim decisions, you could choose to hide the panel decisions from the judges, so that when all 3 judges entered the result, it wouldn't show what the panel decision was, but then Tabroom could announce.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why don't people do Z-score / how can you do Z-score in Tabroom?
Yep.
What is Z-score?
I'm with you.
So Z-score is formula that determines the average points that a judge gives and the deviation from those points. So if a judge is giving 29 fives all the time and they suddenly give somebody a 30, the z-score number would change for the person that they gave the 30 to, as a recognition that that judge gave them higher points than they normally give somebody.
It means if you give shitty points all the time and you give somebody really good points, that means a lot more than someone who frequently gives somebody very good points.
Right, then somebody that gives 29 fives, 29 sixes all the time.
And that's used to rank the teams in brackets?
It can be. So there are a bunch of different tiebreakers, and we can go do that portion next. So in the settings, the rules and results, the tiebreakers is where you set up all of those different features. So the generic one on here is debate prelims. You have to have an elim one, a prelim one, and an elim one, a prelim one, and a speakers one. So the standard one is for ranking teams when it comes to elim seating, is win-loss score from prelims, so how many wins somebody got. If they were 8-0, they'd be the first seed automatically. If they were 7-1, then it would come down to the next tiebreaker. And so the default next tiebreaker is their points scored from the prelim rounds minus their best one and their worst one. So it drops the highest point and the lowest point. The second tiebreaker is that it drops their two best and drops their two lowest points. So it only counts speaker points from, at WIG it would be from 4 debates. The first tiebreaker would be 6 debates. Then the point score from prelims is the total points that they've gotten all over the course of every preliminary debate. The op seed score is what the strength of their opponents. And then the default one is a coin flip random if it got down to that tiebreaker. Now, you could set up any tiebreakers you really wanted to. It lets you set up all of these tiebreakers, which is ranks, win-loss. I have no idea what reciprocals is. Points, the number of ballots in a world where you had 2-judge or 3-judge prelims. So like the NDT, you could add judge prefs, whoever got the highest prefs. The seed, their opponent ranks, their opponent wins. The head-to-head, which is useful for round robins. The chair ranks, when you're assigning 3-judge panels, you can assign a chair of that panel, so you could make that person's ballot worth more than the rest. The number of losses. The JVAR is your Z-score, the JVAR and JVAR 2.
So, are some of these for like British parliamentary debate and other things?
Yes.
Are these, okay.
Yep.
Because like in British parliamentary debate, the chair can just decide.
Yep.
Regardless of what anybody else wants, isn't that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And who's And the tournament director has just decides what the tiebreakers are and what order they're in.
Yep.
Because
Aren't there general practices though, generally what people do?
Yeah,
I mean, it's not, I know it's no rule for what you have to do, but is this another one conflict of interest?
Yeah.
Do they publish it ahead
I
of
did
time?
the same thing.
Or after?
There should be in the invite, I would think.
Yeah, I don't know if most people put them in the invite, but this is generally the
That's fine.
the default one. The Council of Tournament Directors 2013 document has 2 or 3 ways of doing the various order for things. And then the one that's probably the one that's changed the most over the last couple of years is the debate speakers.
Nick, if they don't publish it before the tournament, is there a way to find out after the tournament how they chose, how they did tiebreakers?
Yeah, it'll show up in the results. When they publish the results or this list of speakers in order, it'll
If you really
show you what
panicking,
they'll-
just go to Tabroom and threaten.
Yeah.
And really, you can really ask, typically you can email whoever's tabbing that tournament, and that will be in the invite. You can just ask them ahead of time.
Yeah.
Like I often email tab before a tournament to find out what their settings, mutuality, and what their settings are.
Yep. There's also a contact on Tabroom. You can designate a certain person as the contact to get all those emails, and we can talk about that step in a second.
And Judge Bar 2, what is that?
I think that's Z-score.
That's Z-score. as one of the z-scores. I don't know what the difference between judge bar 2 and judge bar
It's
1
like
is,
two,
to be
it's
honest
like
with you.
instead of one standard deviation, it's two standard
Yeah.
deviations.
Alright, that's what I was thinking.
Well, I think one is ranks and points, and the other one is just points.
Maybe, I honestly
I
can't
think
think of
it's,
it.
I think it's like two, basically, they do the calculation again, one also.
Oh,
To make it
So,
more precise.
also,
I don't know what that means or how that math works.
yes, Michael.
Does somebody have a
oh,
question?
yeah, okay. So I know like speaker points, tiebreakers are utilized a lot. How often, in terms of like sorting the bracket, or do you go to like the 6 tiebreakers?
Generally, for the setting the bracket, it doesn't go past the 3rd tiebreaker. So it doesn't go past. Wins, high low, double high low is generally where there's enough deviation between the two.
What's the logic behind double high low?
It's the same logic as high low, where it kind of gets rid of variance from their 2 best debates and their 2 worst debates. Yeah, it eliminates more outliers to identify the median. So like single high-low eliminates an outlier on both sides. Double high-low eliminates 2 highs and 2 lows to eliminate an additional layer of outliers.
Sweepstakes and points bids, usually more so for like high school events.
Yep. And then the tournament one, after you set it up the first time, once we did that first one, this is where you can set up access. So you can set somebody as the contacts for the tournament, and then you can give different levels of permission to somebody else who's helping on your staff. The owner's the person that really set up the tournament. Admin gives basically the equivalent level of access. Limited allows people to check off which rounds have started. Otherwise, they don't get to pair debates. And then entry only allows people just to take entries and set those up or modify entries. But then you just add a new staff by using their Tabroom email address and granting access. What is it? Samantha Godney?
There's another Samantha Godney in California who gets very mad. She gets a lot of speech dogs. No, she just gets a lot of speech dogs. Like, people don't put the E in there. She's also like a biologist or something.
Sam
So
and
she's
admin
like,
at her own
I keep
tournament.
getting academia EDU, like your paper. I'm like, that's not me, I wish it was. Political science doesn't pay like that.
And Catherine, what's yours?
Catherine Rita.
You ain't judging the USAG debates, there should be some interest in
She probably thinks I'm a very interesting one.
She'd be mad as
She's converted.
So NYU DLA.
strongly worded email. Samantha.
Alright. Now that I've set up the tie breaks and the rules, you go back to the events.
It's not. It only is if you already have existing tournaments.
Right, you can just
clone
copy it.
Yeah, if you already copied it, then you set the speaker awards, debate speakers.
That is a whole little process. Man, we ain't gonna do it.
You can also, one of the nice features in Tabroom that they installed was this updates button on each event, and this is where you add a follower for the Tabroom staff, and this will text you the second you get the first ballot in that division, and the second you get the last ballot in that division. So Tabroom staff generally go out to eat during a debate, then you know when you have to start heading back, and then you know when you can pair the next debate. Makes your life a lot easier if you sign up for that.
Wait a minute,
Yeah.
run that back one more time.
So
You said I could schedule it so that I would know when to set up the next debate?
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can. So the
So I
settings.
could like go leave and go to the
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the best feature.
This is the best feature that they implemented.
My ears perked up on that one.
Catherine and I are literally at the tournament tabbing.
Yeah. We have to practice.
Also, we have to watch college football.
I did not know about this.
It's awesome.
So setting schedule is where you'll set up the actual schedule for the tournament.
Okay.
So round one, whoops.
That would be a good feature where you can just tell the judges every round they're gonna judge in the tournament.
You have to preset it.
You have to preset the whole
The
tournament.
whole tournament.
You can change which rounds judges are available for.
In competitions, right?
But otherwise,
Except which rounds they're available.
yeah, you can change it. So if you request rounds off, you can make it so that you're only available in the debates that you say you're available for.
Alright, so like if we went to like judges under entries and we clicked you directly, Michael Barlow, we could be like, he has round 6 off because he needs to go eat.
But you have to do it for every single judge.
Yep.
Okay.
And the problem is when at smaller tournaments, when everybody's like, oh, round 6 off, you may not have enough judges at round 6. So tournaments will generally start denying some of those requests.
But also like highly preferred judges who are in for a very little amount in regional tournaments judge the last 2 rounds because they break rounds, get a higher. That's why Vita judges every round. She's always in for 2 judges, 5 and 5, 6.
Facebook list of people that judge my points.
I'm sorry.
So in terms of,
I'm not thinking about it.
hopefully.
Nick, I'm listening to you. I'm still here because I'm listening to this.
I think Billy was going to say something.
No, I'm saying in terms of setting up the tournament, it's extremely important to set up each event directly to know how things flow. Because for example, some people may have different time schedules for novices or a whole different tournament or event going on. So making sure that the schedules either don't conflict in certain spaces when you need certain judges is extremely important. So set up the schedule. I've also had a lot of problems with mis-scheduling rounds in multiple divisions.
So once you set up the schedule, then you set it up for each individual event. And since I only created JV Varsity, the 2 rounds that I have enabled are round 1, round 2. You can set whether or not you're using them. You can set how you want those done. So a prelim preset, a high-low, a high-high. See, it's even tight. It's still tight. It's just the way it's I zoomed in as much as I can zoom in, unfortunately. It will not let me zoom in more than that.
Zoom out.
I don't know. So you can set it up as a preset, a high-low, a high-high, an elim, or a final. And then the important part of this is once you start scheduling all the way through the elims, if you have novice and JV, and those are running elims at different portions. So like if the novice division is at quarters and the open division is in octos, you want to run those as early as possible rather than later. So you want to take the rounds off at the bottom, not at the top. Otherwise, your judge pools will get a little confusing. So the time block, which is the times that you set up in the original schedule, is what will set judges available for that period of time. And then the tie breaks, debate prelims and debate elims are generally the ones that you'll want as your tiebreaker. For all of prelims, you'll want prelims. Debate elims will tell you it's just win-loss that will determine who advances. And then you can set the number of flights for LD or any other events. 2 flights, 3 flights if you're into that. Since this tournament doesn't have the sites in the rooms where you can add rooms, we could talk about room blocks if we really wanted to, but without do it
The most important thing about this is that you can import an entire file of rooms.
Yep.
So it's not like you have to go in and add them one by one. You can just import a document with those rooms listed.
Right.
So.
Yeah, you can import them from previous years, which is the important part. And then you can set up room pools. So if you only have rooms that are available for rounds on Saturday that are distinct from Sunday, you can do a list of all of your rooms at once, and then you can panel rooms, and then you could set up a Saturday pool and a Sunday pool, and then you could assign those to certain debates, so that it will only use those rooms for those given debates.
It's also helpful for different divisions. You can have novice division of
Yeah.
pool rooms, JV.
That's kind of where the blocks come in too. So you can block certain areas completely off for a particular division.
I know I'm asking too many questions, this was my last one.
All right.
It's actually a bad question. Why high lows instead of high?
So what?
He's asking when you pair rounds, why is it that you set the setting to high-low for more debates than just making them all high-high?
You mean when you do presets?
Or I know I get
When
round
you
one
pair
as
the
a
debates,
preset,
yeah.
but then like round 3, you said it's high low.
Gary Larson actually has a long article on
About
this
that,
that goes into like the numbers of why that's better, which I don't think any of us want to get into, but like it does exist. I'll find it somewhere.
And it just makes the tournament easier.
Well, it makes it so, because it's easier, in a world where you're pairing high highs, the 1 and the 2 seed will hit in the next debate. And then, so at the 4-0 bracket, you could have a team that's just like not that great, but is like winning by the skin of their teeth, go 6 or 7-0, and a team, the 2 best teams, because they're constantly debating each other, they're going to get those losses earlier. So you're rewarding teams that are not the greatest and punishing the teams that are better off.
You want them to earn their keep, kind of.
It's like, it's just brackets, right? It justifies a bracket.
No, yeah, but that's right though, right? Because if the first 2 are preset, right? Nobody's gonna be 6-0 that doesn't deserve to be 6-0. Right?
Well, I mean, think about it in the way of which the bracket works. You'd rather have the 1 hit the 32, which is the high and the low, versus the 1 hit the 2 in the first elim.
That's the reason.
Yes.
That's
Because
it
we're
just-
taking
it's
losses
key to
in
brackets.
rounds and teams were clearing who should have been 5-1
Right.
or 6-0, and instead they were 3-3 and they barely cleared, and they were basically one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the country debating each other.
Like,
So ideally, what would happen is that the 32 would magically become the 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's kind of the reason why they do high-low.
Well, that's mostly within brackets too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's high-low. It's not like the 4-0 hits the 0-4. It's the highest within the 4-0 bracket hits the lowest within the 4-0.
And the issue is that when those brackets are broken, that's the kind of the pull-up thing, right? Is that you get to pull up individuals from other brackets in order to even out brackets. In order to protect teams, for example.
And to get nerdy, there's never a good reason to do high in a 6-round tournament, but there is an argument for in an 8-round doing it 1 high in round 5. But that is controversial. Like Gary's run it like a bunch of ways and said it actually doesn't make a difference. But like people say, that it's
Up until 2 years ago,
predates all
those
of us.
tournaments were still high.
And you set the pull up from the middle, and there's no.
So the old system before Gary's SOP was everybody pulled up from the middle. If you couldn't pull up the team that was in the middle based on speaker points, you would pull up one below the middle, and you would keep going down. In Gary's system, it just pulls up the team that's had the weakest draw.
So I always thought the opposite of that. It was like you pull up the best team because it's a
That's the high.
That would be high.
The high pulls up the best team to hit the lowest. It would pull up the best 3-1 team to hit the worst 4-0 team.
Because they're the most even match, right?
But the problem is, once you pull a team up, that you want to reshuffle that bracket back to how it was. So you want to go to the next tiebreaker. So once you pull the 3-1 team up into the 4-0, you don't want to keep that one at the bottom of the 4-0 bracket. You want to resort them by the next tiebreaker. So the high-low points. So that team that got pulled up from the middle or from the bracket below may end up being like the 3rd team in the 4-0 bracket, even though that they were in the 3-1 bracket. So because it's a dummy tournament, we don't have teams that are entered. This is a tournament not too long ago, and it's got the schematic of round 6. It shows you the rooms, the win-loss of teams. So this is a pretty good example of what happens at smaller regional tournaments where this is a 12-team tournament, where the 2-3 in round 6, due to side constraints, got pulled up to hit the 5-0 team. And the teams that are in blue are teams that are being pulled up to hit somebody that's outside of their bracket. And
round
then
6, you have both side constraints, and George Mason and Liberty are at least quite a bit of this
Right. You have side constraints. The problem with round 6 or later is you have not only side constraints, but you have constraints based off who that team has hit in previous debates, which limits the number of options that you have available. The next category, so this use category, is the number of rounds a judge has left. So the 1 is how many they have left. The 5 is how many rounds that judge has been used for. And the 6 is how many rounds that judge was they're committed for.
Where do you see that?
This use column right here. So 1, 5, and 6 tells you how many rounds that judge has left, how many rounds they've judged, how many rounds they're in for. So most tournaments or regional tournaments will save judges that are in for 2 rounds and not place them right away because they're generally more placeable later on in tournaments. And try to, because they're running with few extra rounds, we'll try to force in 6-round commitment judges or 5-round commitment judges in as many debates as they possibly can.
Which goes back to neutrality.
Yeah, which goes back to mutuality. Otherwise, you just don't have enough rounds to make the tournament function.
And you can see over in
It's a
that,
big skew.
yeah, you can see in that rating category, that's how each of the 2 teams have rated the judge that's been placed. And you can see in that top debate, there is a pretty big skew. It's a 1949. But
But it's a double pull-up.
there's a couple of reasons why that was true. The first thing is, first of all, if anybody, the team that is getting the bad end of that, that's getting the skew against them, is the team that is getting the double pull-up team. So if you're going to screw any
They're
team,
already broke.
they've already cleared. They're already at an advantage. So if you have to do it in any way, that's the way you would do it. Also, the other screenshot we have shows the other available judges that you could potentially put into that round, and you can see there are no more judges left. The other judges that were available are an 87-79, and remember 80 is that hard strike. That's a hard strike line. 63-92 hard strike. 5-88. Those are hard strikes.
Or you can go beg for rounds from somebody that's already passed their commitment and make
If you believe in mutuality, though, would you go with the 87-79?
No.
It's a strike.
I can't say, if you believe in mutuality,
Not that much.
It's
Not that
because
much.
80 is a hard strike. I believe in mutuality up to 80, and anything below 80 is a hard strike.
Yeah.
So if it was 79-76, I would put that judge in a heartbeat over that other one. But in a world where it's a hard line, I think you have to respect that line. And that was why we did it.
I didn't see the record of the, one was 5-0, the other
2-3.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So you gave the 2-3 team got a 19, the 5-0 team got something in their top half.
And it's still in their top half.
They still lost.
I mean, they got pulled up to hit the 5-0 team. They're
Yeah.
probably.
With their judge.
Yeah.
So, fair enough.
Yeah, but so those are the kinds of decisions that, tab steps you have to make. That's why, I think Samantha and I judges, and we didn't have any teams in this division, so it was kind of irrelevant. But if you have a team in the division, you want to make sure you have other people in the room to make sure that you're not unfairly helping your team or anything like that. Although I will say, no doubt, my teams get worse preps when I'm in the tab room.
Yeah, I sacrifice my teams all the time.
Every time and twice on Sunday, get worse preps when I'm in the tab room.
I'm like, it's my team, I don't care.
I'm like, it's fine, I don't care. Do it, it's fine. But those are the kinds of decisions you have to make, and that's why it's good to kind of know what the principles are, why you're making the decisions you're making.
I also sent you an out round that shows the panel and the balance of that. I just emailed it to you.
Yeah. So in out rounds, when you're putting in judges, it's not just the mutuality and the difference between and preference. It's trying to balance the 3 judges.
No, yeah. that's-
So when you put in the 3 judges, it'll give you what each of the teams ranked to those 3 judges, and you're trying to get an overall difference of 0 or as close to 0 as possible. And as small as that difference can be is a good thing, because that means that, maybe there's one team that you love and they hate, and one that inverse, and then somebody kind of in the middle is what you're ideally looking for.
So this is kind of unfortunate because they don't put it doesn't have the numbers on it, but when you are tabbing it, it'll say like,
It'll show you
it'll say like a 5 or 7.
Yeah,
or
where the
10.
app neg is
Right,
before the bells come in.
Before the decisions are in.
Yeah.
It'll show you what the
So it'll be like
difference is.
25, 15. So there'll be a difference between like the mutuality between the privates.
See, in that bottom round, I think is exactly, that's a 0, right?
No.
So-
Yeah.
That's your ideal round, right? Because that, you know, the AF is a 23 to 20, 6, 6, and then that's the same difference, 3, so it balances out to +3 -3 0. So that's your ideal. That rarely happens.
This is a really pretty pair.
That's a really perfectly pretty
That's a
pair.
really pretty JV
Super
pairing.
handy because we always talk about it as like, you know, if you're against a team that likely has an opposite prep sheet of you, you get our judge, middle judge, and their judge, and they'll try and balance that out. So like you get like your top 5 percentile, their bottom, you know, somewhere close to the bottom of where they're in gettable range, and that'll be the flip side of that for the third judge. So you can kind of look at the prep sheet and imagine 3 floors.
Does that make it easier?
It just helps you strategize for how to get their judge, you know what I mean? If, like, especially if you're filling out a prep sheet for a team that's like, you know, just like super policy or the other way around, you know what I mean?
I mean, twice at West Point, John Katsoulis and Robert Montero were on a panel together. And there was the third, there was a third person that was balancing out the thing. They voted together both times.
Novice debate is a beautiful thing.
That's awesome.
But and then so you see in that that third round down, there's a dash next to the 18 over there. That means that judge was not ranked by a team. It could be sometimes people don't fill out their prep sheets completely. You might have some judge that was added to the pool after they started open, and they may not have done that. There are some squads that, as a matter of philosophy, do not fill out prep sheets, which make tabbing easier. So that's great for us. But that's what that means. So that will mess up the skew on there, so you don't know how they ranked that particular judge.
How does the computer deal with that though? Because it looks like
It treats them as a 1.
that's what it looked like it did there.
Yeah.
It looked like it treated them as a 1.
Yeah.
So do your preps, I guess.
So in the Tabroom, do you try to avoid that situation?
No.
Or do you just?
Oh man, Monmouth is at a regional tournament. I am like, yes.
I enjoy it.
When Monmouth
goes to regional
regional
tournaments all the time and
tournaments,
don't prep anybody.
Yeah.
You look for the.
I'm like, oh, this 30 and this random? Okay.
That's when you get your 74s in, is when Monmouth is in the tournament.
Because the very next judge of that was a 40-23.
Right.
So that's a 17 split.
Yep.
That's a 118.
So I won't feel so bad about, this is my tournament. You can, when you look at the schools, you can adjust the entries and their judges, their money after entries. So this is me at my tournament. You can see on prep sheets where somebody's ranked, their average rating. I'll try to block out what the rating actually is for who the school is, but you can see the average rating of a person. When you go to add judges in certain debates, it will show you what their average rating is for that judge, which means that if their average rating is a 42 and there's somebody that's also close on the mutuality, like if they're a 47-47 or 46-46, and the person that is the 46-46 is an average rating of a 17 versus the person's the 48-48 with an average rating of 47. You want to put in the person with the lower average rating if they're close, because that person's going to be harder to fit in other debates elsewhere.
What's that rating based on? That's not ordinal, right?
That's the average. That's the ordinal average percent that judge is
So it's the
ranked.
percentile. That's
That's
okay.
the average percentile. So that sort of helps you gauge how easy a judge is to place.
Yeah.
Is it the percentile or is the
Percentile modified.
It's the average.
percentile.
It's the average rating. So
That
yeah.
percentile.
It's all of those percentages.
Yeah,
All of
so
those
it's
That's
percentages.
the
the
far
average
column.
percentile of that person.
Well, it's augmented by round commitment too, right?
Correct.
Yes, that's how the percentile is determined, is the round percentile.
That's the higher.
No, I thought like you score in the 98%.
No, bro. You in 98, you ain't judging those.
So somebody that has an average prep of 82% is going to be very hard to place.
See?
I mean, there's sometimes people who are struck out of the like they're ranked by everyone so low that they're in for a full commitment, but you can't place them in any rounds.
Do a little 6 rounds, 12 rounds.
So I won't go to the bottom of this, but
Show me.
not but it shows that it'll list people in their average prep at the tournament and the standard deviation, which is how far apart people rank that person. So the average prep for Lindsay Shook in this tournament was an 18%, within a range of 16 for each other. She'll be really easy to place in any debate. Somebody that's got an average pref at the very bottom of this list with a tighter deviation means that everybody's ranked them at the bottom. That person's going to be very difficult to place.
I was a few minutes late. Did you talk about how we come upon those deviations?
No, we haven't talked about that part yet.
Okay.
So what?
This was just setting up, this is just setting up a tournament.
Yeah, we got slow on setting up a tournament part.
I probably talked about.
Yeah, we can answer those questions.
The only thing we haven't talked about in setting up a tournament is money.
I wanna see where.
West Virginia don't care about money. I do. So set your fees correctly. Penalties and all.
I hear you on
When y'all set up a tournament, I know some tournaments have people pre-rate the teams, and the prelims are based on a pre-rating and how that works. I just never got how they did the pre-rating, which tournaments do that, how it operates.
The only tournament I've ever tabbed that does that is district.
Yes, you also do.
I was gonna say, they did education and
Yeah, we can.
But maybe then we can use just Brian's question.
Somebody did like
Move into questions.
And
So is it
you all
just
have
top to
advice you
bottom?
want to say.
Like last year, I
Sure.
ranked all the teams.
All right, okay, so, I mean, thank you, that was actually really good. Okay, so we're gonna listen to some piece of advice, we haven't forgotten your question, it's a good question. And then we're just gonna kind of field questions, which we've already been doing, and we have some pre-fielded questions
I've asked my
that
shoes.
might cover all of the rest of Barlow's questions, so.
Sure. My number one piece of advice, if you are tabbing or interested in tabbing, is to ask questions. I started tabbing because at the West Point tournament, we've always just run our own tournament because our teams typically don't clear. And that's just how, and we just, historically.
Not that they don't clear, it's that they don't allow them to.
Right, sorry. We're not allowed, we don't let our teams clear. But the point is that, you just have to ask questions. Like, I can't tell you the number of tournaments I've tabbed where every single person on this panel, I will absolutely have no problem asking a question. I have not been tabbing tournaments where people have pulled me out of, an auditorium and be like, I need you, Tabroom, something's messed up, I don't know what's wrong. Don't feel like if you're ever in this position, do not feel like you've messed up or you're too dumb to do this or anything like that. I promise you it's the program, not you, I promise. And I also promise that everyone is super happy to help. Like when we first moved over to the system, I'd be on the phone at midnight, 3 a.m. trying to make it all work, and everyone's really been very great. Nick is a wonderful resource, Samantha, Willie, everyone. The people who tab, we're happy when more people want to learn how to tab. And the point is just, always ask the questions, and if you're interested and you're here, just keep on asking questions.
And also something, it's in like my tournament invite, I know it's in other people's tournament invites, but I should be more proactive about it. If you want to sit in and like watch people tab, at least at my tournament, you're more than welcome to if you're not in for a full commitment. Like I probably can't maybe cover your whatever. But like I think sitting in and watching people do it, like when Tommy is not judging, I always have him come in and like just like look at it, because I think it teaches you a lot about the activity, a lot about how things work. Like you will almost always want to give an extra round after you've tabbed a tournament, because you're literally at the point where you're like in tears and you're like
doesn't work anymore.
But just like, I think a lot of tournaments, I know your tournament, JMU's tournament, or at least most of the tournament invites I read say to just, if you want to get involved, reach out sometimes right before a tournament. Tournament directors are a little busy with other things. We should definitely be more proactive about it too. But if I'm in a tab room or it's my tournament, you can just like come in and we can fiddle.
There's also, when you run into trouble, there's lots of workarounds rather than actual solutions to those workarounds, which is why asking somebody that's run into that problem before or run into something similar is a great resource, because I've run into so many tab room issues by this point in time that I know a lot of the workarounds. But putting them in a document, because every tournament always has some new issue. So at our tournament, I forgot to check the box that allowed same school judges. And the funny part was, in the first two elims, it had been placing judges that were from the same school in the first two elims, but then refused to do it in the third elim for whatever reason, until I went back and checked that button. And then the panel's gotten significantly better. And it's just like, I assumed this button was checked based on how it had done the prefs in the first 2 debates.
So off what Nick says is most of my issues is because of a button I did not click.
Yes.
Or a scheduling issue, which is like I schedule 2 rounds that happen at the same time and they should not, right? So most of my issues is going back, checking for buttons, but the thing for me is because one, I obviously didn't acknowledge or understood that there was diversity in Tabroom. So one thing for me is asking questions to the right people. Obviously for me, Vic is the right person because she'll push you somewhere or scream to you to get somewhere. So she was extremely helpful in teaching me kind of like the basics of like engaging in Tab. But Dr. Neil Birch was really the person who taught me how to like work around everything and to ignore Gary in some situations and Palmer in some certain situations. But it was more so as a shadowing. Is that committing time to when you're not working, judging, or coaching to actually like shadow people and not like, not be there in the sense of like, oh, I see you pressing a button on your computer, because you'll learn nothing. I guarantee you, you will learn nothing. The goal is to ask particular questions, to ask specific questions, to actually play with the Tabroom. You have to pay for it. You might as well learn it. You should pay. You should learn for something you pay for.
Right, that's real.
Right. So fundamentally, I would say is ask questions. Ideally, usually it doesn't work when the tournament is hectic. So like catch me round 1 and 2, we good. Catch me after round 6, we're probably good. Beyond that, there is moments where Tabroom get hectic and we don't like the traffic and the traffic doesn't help us at all. People will be screaming at each other. It happens. But that's the thing that tabbing is frustration because it is just a computer program that you're entering data into and hoping that you'll get the results you want.
Honestly, if you're going to pick a tournament to try to sit in Tabroom, pick a smaller tournament.
Yes.
Because they're often the ones that require the most tweaking versus a national tournament. There's enough teams with enough variety in their prefs that it's just clicking buttons and then it's done. In a smaller regional tournament, due to side constraints, things like that, you have to prepare debates later on to see if you even have a good round 5 pairing in the first place, or if you have to go change your round 5 sides to make a round 6 pairing possible. Things that you wouldn't even think about at a national tournament are problems that are significant at a smaller regional tournament. So like that 12-team tournament where 4 teams are from Liberty, 4 teams are from George Mason, presents a whole host of challenges that are not possible at a national tournament. That kind of gets you thinking more of the small Tabroom details.
Yeah. One thing I also suggest, well, we're going to move into questions next, but it's like do not let this be your only opportunity to figure out about Tabroom. Please contact individuals who are on this panel as well as other individuals, because the only way to get effective and to have more people, more diversity in Tabroom is for more people to get involved.
Yeah, amen.
Questions?
Brian did have a question about
Yeah.
that.
So I know a lot of tournaments pre-rate teams, and then the prelims are based on some way of calculating that pre-rating. Do you know how often that's done, how it's done, any of that stuff? I just know nothing about it other than some tournaments do it.
I think at GSU they just emailed it. At least what happened is they emailed me and were like, "What do you think your teams are going to go?"
Yeah.
I told them the records. Yeah.
I don't think they do that for everybody all
It's
the time.
different.
I got that this year, and I've been doing this for a long time, and it was the first time I got that one.
I don't think there's
We haven't
I know,
done
like,
GSU in a long time, so I don't know.
in past round robins, they'll ask everybody to rate everybody, and then, I mean, like I said, at our tournament, everybody just ranks the pools, and then we take an average, and then GSU was that way. So I don't know, but how do you enter that into Tabroom?
The way I would see it, and I'm not sure because I haven't tabbed at a tournament that does this, that it kind of sets up a bracket or what we perceive would be a bracket, which may help with scheduling presets to be more effective to like kind of delineate who should be getting out of districts or whatever the case is. I don't know personally because I've never been to a tournament.
Who tabs the DA district, because it's the same way?
We did it last year, it's been that way.
Because in DA district, right, we rank everybody.
Yeah.
how
So
do you
what
enter
we
that?
did, so at D8 we have 4 presets, and you try to come up with a magic number, which depending on the size of the pool and the number of teams and the size, which it was not a perfect version of it at our tournament because it was a small tournament with a lot of people from one school, So, but you try to get for all 4 pairings so that you have the average, so that everyone has the same or close to the same strength of schedule. If you say everyone had a 1, everyone, kind of think about it, divide into like 4 categories, an A, a B, a C, and a D, and those 4 presets, everyone had the top 25, a team from the top 25%, everyone had a team
I don't
from...
think that's a great example though, because we hand paired at
Yeah.
D7.
We did have
I
to
think
hand pair,
I
because
think
there's not enough
D7 is a better, because there's more teams, and don't we rank people for that?
Yeah, we rank,
Yeah.
so D7, I have a magic number. The way D7 does it is somebody else compiles the ranking, I have a magic number that has an equalized draw. But the way Tabroom does it is, instead of that random seed, there was an option to choose which seed brackets people hit. And then on entries events, there's this pairing seeds button that then you can adjust the seeds for teams. You can also, it auto-generates, so like later in the year when later tournaments do it, it will take an RPI, which is just like the basketball ratings percentage of win-loss, the strength of schedule the teams have faced throughout the year, and can generate an autofill ranking of those teams. And it will put them in different seed categories for you automatically. And then you can determine somebody that it'll pair based off of those seeds if that was the option you selected. At GSU, since there's no basis for that, that's where they take what coaches will tell them. At districts, everybody ranks it's a smaller number of teams that are ranking it, smaller number of teams, so each district does it differently.
Some other questions, a lot of the questions that people asked ahead of time were already answered, actually. Yeah. Here's one. What is, seems probably maybe a pretty direct question. What is the minimum number of people and specific roles, responsibilities we should aim for during a 60-team policy tournament?
So I think that in terms of your tab staff, if you have teams that are participating and able to clear in the tournament, meaning they're eligible to clear in the tournament, the ADA I think has a requirement that it's three representatives of 3 different schools that are participating. If you're at a tournament where you have a neutral tab room director who does not have any judges or any teams in the tournament, it's fine to kind of be one, though they might want somebody else in there to help because it's a lot for one person. So I think it kind of depends, where you are, but I think that having somebody directing tab and somebody directing the tournament as separate roles and responsibilities is probably a good thing.
Necessary.
Yeah, necessary, yeah.
It also depends on how spread out the buildings are.
For sure.
So if the rooms are in different buildings, then you need to add an extra person to kind of manage getting judges from one building to the other building, starting debates on time, etc.
I would say in terms of minimal 2 people, and 2 people from different schools, just to stop the risk of that conflicting issue or the ability for one to determine what's good for his team. But I would say 3 is the most manageable thing. It makes it easier.
Yeah.
2 questions. So you said that this feature allows for tab to kind of rank people based off strength of tournament, strength of opponents, and like how well they've done at tournament. Is this accessible to people who are not in Tabroom? So if I wanted to see the rankings for people at this tournament, could I go in after the tournament and kind of view them?
I don't think these ones are. I think I have no idea exactly how the RPI is determined or what the formula is for Tabroom determining those.
Wouldn't you need,
you would need
hypothetically, you could create a tournament, but you would need people to enter themselves in your tournament in order to do that. But you could do it hypothetically, it's just,
if you got people to
I don't know why people would enter into your test tournament.
You could also make fake entries, but it wouldn't
it wouldn't track that down.
Yeah, it wouldn't help with data.
Yeah, you gotta get people to enter.
Yeah, the individual success button is or maybe it's the entry success might actually tell you.
No,
What's the
yeah. No, so this will tell you where you can limit it to the certain division, how many teams, the minimum number of rounds, and it will sort it
entry
based on
success, and it sorts it first based on a bunch of stuff.
Yep. And so you can limit it to top 50.
No, you can it's just a button.
Yep, anybody can look at that part. And I think that'll be the same job.
And then do that again one more time.
Yeah, so results, circuit select, NET CETA, the year 1819, hit entry success. And then you choose the debate type, obviously policy, choose the division that you care about, and then you can limit it to top 50. So if you want minimum number of rounds, at most national level teams at this point of the year have had what?
At least 24.
24 rounds.
Yeah.
Limited to top 50,
And it'll have the top 50 schools.
and it'll have the top 50 schools. Although
Team.
it didn't do the minimum number of rounds. It
Who
it has
gets
a
the
7-2
five?
I
team.
think it's got RPI upside down, so it's got RPI 0 at the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Well,
No, wrong about that?
well, and I limited it to top 50, so maybe if I limited it to a top 1,000, it might have actually done that. So 24.
Top 1,000.
They're not 1,000, but I'm trying to figure out if I can sort the RPI. Nope, still at 0.
All right, so it's just broken. There you
It's
go.
just broken, yeah. Just go with it's just broken.
The way it's supposed to work.
So that's-
The way it's supposed to work is that way. I don't know.
All right.
I was gonna say, if the RPI actually works, why don't you have them just publish this pretty routinely, just like, hey, here's a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, something you can request Tabroom.
I feel like, I feel like whenever I go look at this thing, it doesn't ever really start to work until right before the end.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
CETA,
So,
it's CETA.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
because there's, the problem with Tabroom is it has lots of different events, and it has lots of different organizations. So it does international tournaments, it does high school tournaments, it does high school public forum, Lincoln Douglas, VP, lots of different organizations that are all requesting access to different features.
Another relevant question might be, are there any decisions or issues the Tabroom director should be excluded from or seek consultation in resolving, and why?
Anything about your team?
I think that you should also, I suggest people look at best practices given by like tournament directors when it comes to like specific things like conflicts, when it comes to things like issues of like harassment. You should talk to like the people who are in charge of harassment and stuff like that. I don't think that it should be responsibility of Tabroom for tournament behavior stuff.
Yeah, I think 100%. There's a difference between running the tournament and running the tab.
So if I'm running, like we were just in whatever that.
Council of Tournament Directors.
Councils, we got that. On the sexual and like the harassment committee, there's like best practices on, so if there's student to student like conflict, they can not hit each other, and that's something the tournament director should be aware of and do, not the tab person, because then you're getting more people involved in whatever this student to student conflict is. But the tab room should literally hit the numbers, make the machine work. The tournament director should be running the tournament.
Right.
I would also suggest consultation in terms of ethics challenge.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Some questions about MPJ and diversity. What role does MPJ play in creating diverse judge pools? There's a series of all related questions. What role does MPJ play in creating diverse judge pools? How do we get more diverse judge pools? And given that prefs only work in one direction and require that there be black judges at those tournaments, what do we do when those judges are not there and or teams are not preffing black judges?
Well, if anything,
That's a tough question.
Start at the bottom of it is we can't control whether or not black people get pref.
Right.
Like that's something we can't control. That's the whole concept of mutual preferences in general, is that it allows them to avoid certain judges by putting them in strike range, right? That's something that tabroom directors cannot control at all, right? I would say enhancing diversity for your tournament does help to get more diverse people on panels, not necessarily in rounds.
Right. And not necessarily in a diverse set of rounds.
Yeah.
I mean, the Jillian-Marty method has worked well for West Virginia when we've been able to do it. And that's when I hire judges for my tournament to make it run smoother and better. I hire diverse judges. I house them, I feed them. That's the Jillian-Marty method. And when I have done that, I have seen that it works.
And that's a tournament direction issue,
Yes.
not the
Yeah.
tab
Yeah.
issue. On the tab level, you're putting the number, you're kind of making the horses run, right? That's really all you're doing. I do think that's a very important issue that tournament directors need to, and the community at large needs to be dealing with.
So
I will say
I'm
one
just
thing.
gonna say, so it means that we might say that even if there are no prefs at a tournament, if there are no black judges, and we're
There's
not
still
using the
that can be
Jillian-Marty
diverse.
method, then
Yeah.
it doesn't work.
So the goal would be is for tournament directors to hire people of color,
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
like
Prioritize.
Kentucky.
Right.
Well,
Kentucky's exceptionally bad at that.
This is where I also think that mutuality over preference helps a lot in those debates. For context, for a lot of teams that don't have interaction with diverse judges, getting them in like a policy debate. So like if somebody debated K their entire time, policy teams are going to pref them low all the time. That's just instantly, they're going to put them low on their pref sheet. So getting them a few times will help move them up pref sheets after experience, and that takes some time. But it at least is a starting point for getting people more exposure to different types of judges, and at least in my opinion.
I have a bad habit in my tab room running slow at the records running because I make it an initiative to try to do that. So for example, in novice debates, I will put Chaz in a round where it's like a 66, 67 preference. Because neutrality is key, one, and two is that I think he's eligible to judge that debate round. Right.
We were, I think it was Binghamton this year, and we were about ready to release out-round panels, and we did a quick like diversity check, and we're like, oh, that's white. So we literally took someone out. It was the same preferences, and took it out and and they were still committed. We didn't ask people to judge past their commitment or anything, but we put that in. Like that's something that that a tab room.
That is true. That is to amend my earlier conversation. I do think you're right. That it is something that tabs can absolutely do to just double check because.
But only if they're there.
Right.
Right.
Getting them to the tournament.
And Binghamton and Rutgers this year had an amazingly diverse judge pool.
It works at smaller tournaments, doesn't work at larger tournaments where the majority of judging is outsourced through the teams, and like schools will not hire judges. So we can't really control diversity. It's predicated on what community produces.
There's also one of the ways in which the opt-in mechanism has kind of not done its intended consequence. Its intended means, because not enough people opt in, because there is like if you do opt in, you're going to get all of the debates all the time in ELIM, so you're going to get run a little more than you should. So there's a disincentive to actually opt in, which also undermines like getting a diverse judging pool, which is why hiring more diverse judges to judge on the tournament end helps solve a lot of problems.
Because, and this is my issue with the whole opting in, is more labor for me. With no exchange.
People might opt in if there were more people to opt from.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or like
I ain't trying to
Liberty-
judge every year.
I
mean,
agree.
but like
You know what I'm
Liberty
But at the
saying?
same time, it's extremely helpful if you did that.
Well, I mean, I judge them anyway. If you
I
put me
know,
on,
I
ask me,
know,
I'll judge them. But it's
But
like,
Liberty has the ability, and I wish that I did, to pay for every round their people judge. So when they hire people and they judge out rounds, they're able to pay them for that. My institution doesn't allow me to do that. But if institutions are allowed to do that, it's awesome, because then it encourages people to opt in. But, you know, I do understand.
Or if tournaments just reached out, like I know Wake was doing it 2 years ago, was like we will pay you for each round you judge past your commitment as a initiative for diversity.
Yeah.
Right, so if tournaments were willing to do that, even if they're not willing to hire diverse judges, would also be effective.
Cool, so we have some Wake specific questions that I'm not really not certain that I can answer, but one is the pairing is always emailed, and which is not actually happening this year. And I know Gary tabs to Shirley, but how is tab at Wake tournament same or different from other college tournaments? So the only thing I can really say to this, because well, one thing, and this is probably imprecise, is that Gary's system has, for the most part, or maybe entirely, or maybe just for the most part, been now interfaced with Tabroom, which was a thing that was not happening before, which is why we can now receive the ballots. So if you notice, we're not receiving the Gary email ballots.
No, I'm so sad about that, actually. I want to see these speakers.
That's just really weird nostalgia. You gotta let that go.
He still imports things and takes it to STA, which is run out of an Excel document, which is the distinction between Gary's document. His is not tabbed or paired on Tabroom.
Right.
It's then uploaded to Tabroom and then emailed out. So it downloads the data from Tabroom into his Excel document, runs everything on there, then re-exports it back up to Tabroom.
And it's a different system that has different features and a different set of defaults. Like when we were setting up what we kind of think the defaults should be, STA does it differently.
Yeah.
And I don't know all the specifics because I'm not here.
Yeah.
I do not know.
Yeah, it's really confusing to watch Gary tab. But for anyone who really is interested, if you do go to the Wake invite, there is a list of frequently asked questions, and he tries to explain in very confusing language to me.
Yes.
If
you ask Gary, Gary will go on
specifies like,
the
here's how I do
Gary's happy to
mutuality,
engage.
here's how I, here's how opt-in under my system works, here's how I place the people or pull people out. You can find that to some extent in there.
There's also kind of an algorithm that
Gary's,
dictionary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's just a lot of math involved. But yeah, and then there was one last question here before we kind of open it up to anyone who has other questions, which is interesting. Why do some tournaments use paper ballots, which is kind of less and less all the time these days? Are there hidden benefits of paper ballots over using
It
that?
takes so much longer.
No,
It does take longer. I do paper ballots when I run middle school tournaments, which are actually was bigger than the reference tournaments in some cases. The reason why it works is because it doesn't require that we have to link a bunch of like new judges or a bunch of judges. Also, it's just people who are stock on tradition, so like having paper ballots work for certain people. I remember Warren Decker.
I mean, I think at this tournament, when they
Validly
will
against
print
it, so is Will
one,
Baker.
make someone.
Well, that inspires me.
I mean, the problem with paper ballots, right, is that it makes somebody else do data entry, so there's always a risk of messing up the results. I mean, in the 90s, I've heard stories where at State Nationals there was a ballot entry issue. They hit A instead of N, or the 2000s, okay, whatever it was, but there was an A versus an N, and the rest of the rounds were paired based on incorrect data because it's manual. You're doing an extra level of double check where if you have the judge do it themselves, they can double check it themselves. They were the only ones in the round. It adds just more opportunities for mistakes in my mind.
As a judge, I did write way more comments when it was on paper though than I do now,
That's
which
true.
that may be good for y'all who are tired of reading my what do you see was good?
Yeah, in TRPC, back when paper ballots were more of a thing, it shifted the burden for that double check onto the tab staff versus the judges, and that creates a difficulty like after round 6 when you're trying to pair elim debates to do the double and or the triple check that the data was entered properly, and that's when you actually want the data to be checked the most, right before you're going to determine who clears. So that's why the online ballots are better, is because the judge has to do that check.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for presenting.
Right now, the meetings for good. We're not gonna get meetings all day.
I'm not sure, but I'm just jealous. Machine judgment.
Which I can set up.
None of these lines are right. No wonder we have to talk. None of these
I told you, right? Yeah, it's you. I told her, I was like, I'm kind of jealous because you're not even right.
That was better than Right, I didn't want to say that because that is me.